The subject of story is something that gets discussed quite a bit in coaching, therapy, other healing modalities, and there's a lot of very strong opinions whether story is important or whether it's actually a hindrance, something that keeps us trapped in the past. And this is exactly what my friend Evan and I are going to pull apart today in our conversation is, what is story? When is it really supportive and beautiful? When can it actually become a hindrance? And what are some of the ways that we can pull out the real gold from stories when people might want to be stuck at the surface? So if you are someone like me and you're very curious about story, I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Welcome to episode 8 of the Out of Step podcast. This is the podcast for those of you in the ecosystem of supporting other humans, the coaches, therapists, the facilitators, educators, the healers, whatever you call yourself. If you support other humans, I think you're going to love this podcast. And specifically those of us who love to live on the edges of these roles. This is what I created it for. I was having a hard time finding podcasts that had more challenging conversations and talked more from an outsider type of a standpoint. So that's why I created the Out of Step podcast. If you are someone who is looking for coach training or coach certification, my Wayfaring Method coach certification is currently open. We start in early May. And this is basically a blend of all of these incredible foundations that I've learned over the past 23 years with a lot of internal work so that we can do what we talk about in the podcast today, which is lean into our intuition, really trust our deeper sense of wisdom as we sit with others. So if this makes you curious at all, you can head to outofstep.life/wayfaring method, or you can even connect with me on Instagram. It's just andrew.carruthers, and you're welcome to just shoot me some messages there with whatever you are curious about. I knew I wanted to have my brother, Evan Bourcier, on the podcast because every time I drop into a conversation with this man, I feel more intelligent, more inspired as I leave the conversation. And we drop deep when we start talking. And Evan was the perfect person for this particular podcast about story because he is one of the most masterful storytellers that I've ever known. And he is the Chief Creative Steward at his company, Challenger Media House. And that's exactly what his company does. They create these incredible stories, both for individuals and companies. But as you'll learn within the podcast, the way that he sees this wonderful world of story and the way that he pulls it out and puts it together, it's incredibly special. If you want to connect with Evan afterwards, you can always hit him up on Instagram at Challenger Media House on Instagram, or he also has a Substack that is very fascinating, and that's called the Challenger Grimoire. And I'll make sure all those links are in the description so that you can connect with Evan. All right, homies, I hope you are ready to dive deep. Let's get started with my friend, Evan Bourcier. So for us to just check in and get connected today, let's check in with one word each for how you are mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And if you forget one, don't worry, I'll help you.
Okay, beautiful. Mentally, very quiet today. Emotionally, also quiet. Physically, aware. And spiritually, connected.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Your turn.
Yes. Mentally, conflicted. Emotionally, open. Spiritually, curious. And physically, constricted, I think is the word for it. Yeah. But with that, we're in. So excited to have you here.
Dude, I'm excited to be here.
As we were just kind of going back and forth, the one thing that you mentioned as, potential things we could talk about on the podcast, as soon as you said the word story, I was like, ooh, yes, there's something about telling our story that felt really important. And so I'm just curious for you, because I know this has been a huge thing for you, storytelling. What ignited this like passion that you have, this interest that you have for telling stories?
What a beautiful question. I think if I'm being really honest, it started for me growing up in a very conservative, evangelical, homeschooled environment where stories were not welcome a lot of the time. And there's a lot of forms of that, but I remember specifically one time I was in high school and I was a part of this youth group at the time and very involved in music, and one of my good friends was asked to share his testimony with the kids. But he was told, just don't talk about like the sex or drugs or anything else, basically. And I just remember being like, so what's the story then? It's like, I was good, I'm good, guys, everything's good. And I didn't have a lot of language or clarity on exactly why that rubbed me the wrong way. But it was a little bit of it was a MacGuffin. I think it was an inciting action in my own story that really put me off on this quest to understand stories and the roles that they play in our life. I was always really passionate about art and visual art. I was really into illustration as a kid, but was never, I've always had like poor hand-eye coordination, fine motor skills for whatever reason. I feel like I've got doctor's handwriting, and like illustration was not my thing. But when I found Photoshop also in high school, that really unlocked this new realm of being able to actually express the ideas that I had. And then right around that same time, coming out of high school, I was serving in the church and got a camera for Christmas. And that was a very big light bulb moment for me of just this connecting place of all these things that I loved, with technology, with people, with interpersonal skills, with art, and getting to really have this kind of ikigai experience of like, this is my happy place in the Venn diagram. And I kind of just let the camera pull me through the next few years of my life, if I'm being honest. And that took me to Haiti, like 6 months in. I was like 18 years old and had just had a camera for 6 months and met a dude at a summer camp who ran an organization down there and got invited to go spend 2 weeks on a medical missions trip. And for me, it was this profound sense of getting to connect with people who just had such a very different life experience than I did, and getting to share that with other people. And from that point, I also remember just this deep sense of respect and the willingness to look even into the ugly parts. And that was something that I remember, no judgment to them, but I do remember a lot of the team members on that trip coming back each night from whatever we had been and really having these almost just difficulty integrating the reality of what they were seeing, that like this was possible in the world, Yeah. Which wasn't always like, it wasn't brutality or anything. It's like kids playing soccer with a soccer ball made out of t-shirts.
Right.
And for me, that experience and getting to share a peek into that world was another just formative one. And being someone who would sit in the pocket and go, I want to listen to you. I want to listen to what has happened to you. And I remember we were telling a story of a kid who had been a Restavik in Haiti. And so they're basically like Cinderella kids. They get sent off into the city or whatever to go basically be a servant for their uncle or whatever. And he was just telling us about how, I forget, his family didn't have money for food, and so his mom sent him to live there, and his uncle was really mean to him, and his cousin or whatever was abusive. I don't remember the exact details, but he had me feel the dent in his head where his cousin had steel-toe boot kicked him in the head and caved his skull in.
Wow.
And it was intense. Like, it's it's really intense. But there was something for me in that moment of us getting to connect and getting to hear it and feel it and acknowledge it without glamorizing it, without catastrophizing it, without having to pretend this doesn't happen and you shouldn't talk about that, to actually validate his experience and the man that he had become in the midst of all of that, was a really powerful thing for me. And from that point on, I became very passionate about just telling real stories well. And, you know, there's more we could say about that, but that was kind of the inciting series of incidents for me where I really felt this opportunity to connect with other people. And I think if I'm being really honest, part of it too was getting to share space that I had not been given for a lot of my life, that my stories were not welcome, that my experiences were not welcome. You know, we don't talk about that, whatever else. And so just getting to play that role in people's lives and connect with people in that way has been something that has created a lot of meaning and beauty in my life.
I've definitely noticed that that is a pretty consistent pattern that I hear as far as like people finding that sense of calling within things is very often it's with the purpose to provide something for other people that they did not get. It's like, I did not get this as a kid. I did not have that need met. So I'm going to make sure that I provide that for other people. I'm curious, like, because you said within the church that the story wasn't welcome. What do you think their perspective was? Like, what was unwelcome about the story for them?
You're asking me dangerous questions, Andrew.
This is a dangerous fucking podcast. Lay it out.
Okay. I mean, honestly, I feel like so much of what I grew up surrounded by was just fear. And it was, you know, there's deep-seated worldview reasons for that fear, which now make a lot of sense to me. If you really believe that life is like some kind of loading screen prank that you just have to get your like get out of jail free card and then turtle till you die, till you get to heaven, then like, yeah, you don't want to be exposed to anything that threatens that. And that was very much my experience growing up in that world, was that we were going to go find a way to check a box, and then we were going to kind of live in our commune and point our fingers out at how bad everyone else in the world was and how dumb the things they were doing were and how rebellious kids with skateboards were and how tattoos were bad. And like, I mean, I was pretty close to like denim jumper homeschool kid growing up. So it was we weren't allowed to watch Nickelodeon. It was just fear. It was a lot of fear about a lot of things. And honestly, I think too, coming from a place where you haven't yet accepted those things and those realities inside yourself, and that other people sharing those brings those things back up for you. And people didn't have the tools or the capacity to actually sit with those realities. And so it was a lot of just shutting things down, you know? And like, I mean, I feel that as long as we're getting dangerous, it's like, I remember going to the mall with my mom and her like getting into arguments with department store managers about lingerie stuff being out in the store with her teenage boys. And it was just very like hyper protective. You know, I don't want them to be exposed to this. I don't want them to see this. Which creates its whole own set of narratives then in us again about what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable. And you're now in the shame spiral. You're caught in the shame spiral. And that was one of the things that I also would say I found really powerful, was that stories told well do give us an opportunity to actually break the shame spiral.
Yeah, I can definitely see that in spaces that want to control, want to confine, story is often not welcome. You know, look at the different places that we can look back and see people burning books and, you know, taking away that ability for people to share, not just concepts, but like you said, that sort of commonality, that connection through, oh, wow, okay, you're bringing up something that brings up something for me. Because then connection happens. And then when connection happens, that creates power. And if we don't keep you separated, we don't have power over you.
Right.
So I can see a lot of the layers to just why story is not welcome in a lot of places. And then you started to say too that like that was part of the redirection for you, though, is now that I can see how story can be taken away, like how that power can be taken away, and let me actually create power with it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just this very simple question to this. Sometimes I would like to make questions complicated, but there's a simple question here. What is the power of story?
To me, story is something that exists on multiple levels and can be engaged with on multiple levels. There's sort of this surface, day-to-day level of story, which I would say is more of an anecdote, but it's actually what a lot of people think story is. And I find that, in doing this work professionally now, where people will just kind of ask about facts. And a series of facts is not a story. A series of objective facts is generally also not a story. A story has a subject, it has a perspective, it has connections between each element of it. And in many ways, whether this is a limitation of my own psyche or true, I'm not going to say it's big T true. To me, it's a microcosm of life itself when done really well. And that takes us to the level of myth, and that myth is stories that are so much truer than the day-to-day fact stories that we can get caught up in. Inside of that, stories are an opportunity to express our experiences, to express how we feel, to express how things have affected us. And in many ways, they're one of the only ways we really have to connect about those things. Like, stories are as old as we are. And stories shared in safe places are an opportunity for us to say, oh yeah, me too. I thought I was the only one, but I've also experienced that. So when I look at stories, it's like stories, like most things, can be used to manipulate, to isolate, to separate. There's a wonderful quote, I believe it's by Anne Voskamp, which is that it's much easier to tell stories of what tear us apart than of what brings us together. And I think about that a lot. I actually think, to me, that's part of the core challenge behind Challenger, is how do we tell stories in a world that wants to be so polarized and divisive, that can actually break through these sort of shallow walls that we put up around things and break down old narratives. Mm-hmm. Because the deeper reality, in my experience, is also that we live stories. We're living myths. Our whole understanding of meaning and the way that we navigate the world is fundamentally based on symbolic relationships and how those things are playing out in our life. And stories give us an opportunity to see and feel those things more deeply. And in seeing and feeling those things more deeply, it also gives them an opportunity to shift. And so, like, a small example of that, we're working on a project right now. My wonderful friend, neighbor, client, landlord, Cody Fry, who is a Grammy-nominated musician, has an incredible project coming out soon. It should be announced by the time this comes out. And we were working on a documentary on the making of that. And it's his first symphony, full symphony project. Oh. And he decided to do this crazy thing where he put a whole orchestra in like a 2,000-gallon water tank in front of a multi-million-dollar LED wall and did it all live. And we got to tell the story, and it's crazy. But I've been working with my brother for the last 2 weeks on wrapping up this longer form documentary that's going to come out alongside that. And one of the pieces that I really honor Cody for is about his collaboration with our other friend Zach, who was directing the video side. And one of the things that Tate said as we were pulling this piece together that struck me was, it's crazy to see how capable you all are we're all very like multidisciplinary, you know, we're wizards in our own right, I guess. But he was like, and how kind you all are. Like, no one's a diva, no one's power tripping, no one's yelling at anyone. And he's like, for so much of my life, I always thought people like that had to be like that. And we don't have to say that out loud. That's like an implicit truth inside the story. You get to see a different set of character combinations play out. And that's one of the deeper levels of story, is like you have the explicit, what we're talking about, and then you have all the implicit stuff that's contained inside of how these people are relating to each other, how they're speaking about themselves. And we pick up on those things, and they allow us to see them in ourselves. Reminds me also of a documentary we did with a CrossFit athlete a few years ago. His name's Chandler Smith. He was the #1 seed in North America going into semifinals. And I was really curious about him because he was a guy who kind of publicly had a lot of negative self-talk despite being a beast. And that was my main sort of line of inquiry, was like, what's going on inside this guy? And event 1, he blew up, just like failed miserably a million times at a million things, was falling over, having trouble breathing. No one knew what was going on. And really no one knew what was going on, which is one of the things that I've now learned to love, is to stay in the pocket of that moment, to just keep watching, because in those moments you see things that are more true than the things that we want to project as being true. And to make a long story short, what ended up coming out through the course of this weekend was that he had had asthma since he was a kid. And he had always wanted to be special forces. His dad was an NFL linebacker. He wanted to be special forces, but he was ineligible because of his asthma. And so the reason that he got into CrossFit originally was so that he could complete basic with an asthma attack. And so he would trigger asthma attacks and go like run 2 miles for time. And he was like, I'm just going to become indestructible so I can go do this thing. And he did. He was in some sort of armored tank division or something. He ended up losing a finger in a Humvee accident, came back doing CrossFit competitively, but he had never told anyone. His coach didn't know about this. Nobody knew about this, because he was worried that if people knew about his inhaler, that inhalers are technically steroids, and he was already getting shit for looking like he was on steroids. And so he had hidden it from the entire world for his whole career. And finally, in his big moment of being the #1 seed in semifinals, it came out for everyone to see. And during this whole story, the thing that he also keeps saying is like, I'm sorry, you guys, I'm sorry this isn't worth anything. No one wants to watch the video about the 11th fittest guy at Granite Games. And I was like, I feel this in my soul, all of this, that if I'm not winning, I don't matter. The people aren't going to believe why I have this limitation. The people are going to like, and those are the stories behind the story, right? And to me, that's the deeper level of story that I get really passionate about, is where we can really dig into someone's character and their ethos and the way they're navigating the world and view it with compassion and honesty. It's not, hey, that's stupid, why do you do that? It's like, oh, I do that too. And then we have this opportunity to connect. And in that connection, those illusory separations can dissolve a little bit.
The thing that you said that really stuck with me is that stories are not just a list of facts. And, you know, part of what I'm also listening through because of my own filters is like, how do I take part of what you're sharing with me and translate that into what I do with my work, which is what I call it wayfaring. Some people would call it coaching, whatever you want to call it. But especially for those of you that are listening that do that type of work with other humans, there's a lot of different paradigms out there when you go through different coach training or therapy training. You get a really wide spectrum of, well, don't allow your client to go into story, which never really sat well with me, because I'm like, but people's story is important. Like, it has value. It has something in it of value. And what you just shared actually was a really good distinction for me as I think about like the difference between what could potentially be supportive story versus what could just be me relisting and reliving events and facts. You know, because part of what you shared as you were telling us about the CrossFit athlete, Yeah, you were giving us some of the facts. Like you were setting up like, okay, here's who he is, and this is what the setting was as far as like, you know, he was going to CrossFit, and here are some of the details about this thing. But the piece that really hooked me was when you, towards the end, as you started to share with us that no one wants to know a story about the 11th person in this event. I'm like, oh, because that's the experience that he had through the events and how he was creating identity and story within his own life. And so for me, it brought some clarity. And yeah, I don't necessarily want my client to just go back and list out facts of their life. Well, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. That's kind of just the facts of it. It's more about, what was your experience? What did you make that mean? What do you carry from that? Like those are the pieces that I think actually create more the ethos and the mythic aspect of it is like, what's kind of like the lesson between all the different little events that occurred. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Like, what are your thoughts about the difference maybe between kind of quote helpful story versus unhelpful story?
It's a wonderful question. I mean, to be honest, it's something that I have wrestled with a lot in my personal life as well, which I find very interesting because it's one of those places that I feel like I have close to endless rope for anyone on the other side of the conversation. And then the minute that gets turned to me, I'm like, no, this is bad for some reason. I shouldn't go into this. And there are a lot of systems, I would echo, that say that like, don't do this. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
My experience is that, again, it's like, how are we navigating this? There are stories that connect to meaningful sort of impulses and inflections in our life, I would say. And whether that's moments of inspiration, moments of courage, moments of fear, you could get deeper into the theory around psychic wounding and whatnot and emotional overwhelm and how these experiences are actually affecting our being. But that I've definitely met people who will just sort of loop a story. And I find a lot of the times that the story is kind of it's a avoidant tool in some way. It's like a justification of, well, this had to go this way because yada, 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 you know? I mean, as long as we're on the subject, I had an interesting experience with that last Friday. I was talking to someone and they were asking me if I had been to church recently. And I was like, not really. And they were sort of asking why, and I told them. And I asked something about, well, why is that important to you? And what I got was, well, the Israelites in Babylon and then in Revelation, and it was just one of these spiels. And I was like, that's not an answer. That's what part of you thinks the answer should be, but that's not the actual answer. And I will say one of the deadliest and most underrated tools, as someone who has done thousands of interviews and screwed up a lot of them, but gotten a lot of gold, is that when someone goes into that, it's just hitting them with the, what makes you say that? There was another story a few years ago I was telling of my very close friend from junior high who, on his way to go see Avengers Endgame, stopped at a Dunkin Donuts and was randomly violently assaulted by a Latin Kings gang member who slugged his brother. He slugged the guy back. Now they're in a fight. They were both like MMA trained. And long story short, he caught a knife through his femoral artery in the process. And I'll say the film's worth watching. I don't want to spoil all of it. But when we did that interview, it was very much, for me, the process of going, I want to create an experience where you just get to really share how this was for you. There were a few important guidelines for me that was like, I don't want us to get into shoulda, coulda, wouldas. I never want to put that in the audience's hands. And so like we didn't get into the details. We didn't show the security camera footage, which did exist. And my intention there was that I really want you to feel how much this sucks. Because at the end of the day, the piece is called On Choosing Violence, and the opening sort of premise is him saying something to the effect of, it's a weird thing to have to decide whether to end someone's life or not. And to me, that tied back very much to our early experiences with being raised with a bunch of people who were very, Second Amendment-y, knifey, macho, like if anyone does anything to me, I'm going to kill him. And it's like, okay, that's great in theory, but what about in reality? Like when you actually have a guy's trachea under your hand and you have to decide what to do, what are you going to do there? Mm-hmm. And that was, to me, the essence of that story was just about that. But we opened that piece. He sat down and read his victim impact statement from the trial, which is very moving and very honest. And at the end of that, I remember asking him, how does it feel to read that again? He said, it feels pretty melodramatic. And I was just like, tell me more. And that, like, tell me more, what makes you say that? In those moments of, like, he's posturing, right? Like, and I do it. We all do it. It's some moment of, like, I don't want to feel it. That sucks. Oh, that's just the way the internet is. Oh, that's just, sorry, it's the algorithm. Oh, sorry, whatever. Corporate America. Blech. Defense story comes up. But sometimes just sitting there and like literally keeping eye contact to be like, tell me more about that. There's a story beneath that story. And that story, whatever it is, maybe when I was a child, James Hollis talks about this in Under Saturn's Shadow. It's like the stories we get of to be a man is to work and to work is to be hard and that your needs are not necessary. And so then you'll get the surface level story that's like, well, yeah, I'm fine. My body hurts and yada, 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 but that's just how it is. It's like, tell me more about that. And then you get to the story that's actually driving the myth in their life, right? The story that, well, you're not supposed to complain about this. Well, part of Dennis's thing, and just to be clear, I totally love Dennis. It's not a dig at him. I have a million versions of this myself, was like, basically, well, there's starving kids in Africa and I was fine, so no one wants to hear my sob story. I was like, I get that. Also, what happened to you is fucking brutal, dude.
Right.
You lost 70% of your blood in a Dunkin Donuts. Like, you had to tell your brother to say goodbye to your mom because you didn't think you were going to make it. Like, this is real right now. And to me, the real power of that, too, is whatever the mystery is, that when we can actually be with those things and acknowledge those experiences we've been through, that it does reintegrate some part of us that otherwise sits fragmented off to the side. And so to me, it's like we have this opportunity to go around, and I kind of think of it like we're putting Horcruxes back together.
Yes, I love that you just made a Harry Potter reference. That's amazing.
Because we leave these fragments of our soul in the past, and then we say, well, the past is the past and it doesn't matter. And sure, time's not real, past doesn't matter, 5D, yada, yada, whatever. It's all now. And it is playing out now. The past is playing out now. Everything is now, including the past, and how we relate to that past affects how we show up now. And so when I get into those experiences, which not everything is some super deep existential story, but that's to me the real power. And for people who are in these positions, I think it's that recognition of like, is this an honest, heartfelt thing, or is this a defense mechanism right now? Is this a story that they have used? It's their own internal narrative of why they don't want to tell you the thing that they actually feel underneath it. And just pulling them out of the story will often not get you beyond that wall, in my experience. You almost have to accept the story and go with the story and remain curious with the story and go, tell me more about that story. And in the case of Dennis, it was 2 hours of interview of us kind of filibustering around this thing and not really getting anywhere. And then at some point it finally clicked and we got to how he really felt about it and how he felt about being a nothing guy from a nothing town, and like the real story came out. And that's the thing that I will say too, is it's very hard to do that in a 60-minute session. I don't know about all the people who listen to this, but my own experience even with therapy is that like a lot of these conversations do take time and safety and like persistence to really get into with people. But that our surface level stories, which I think is what we're avoiding, are usually the walls we use to keep ourselves from accepting the reality of what's going on in here.
Yes. I feel that deeply, actually. Just reflecting on, how many times I have protected myself with so many layers of external story and how much it took to dismantle that outer surface and to get through that version of, well, this is what's happened and this is what that means about me, to actually get to that layer of like real mythos. And I hope those of you that are listening, that do similar types of work that I do, sit with people, whether you're a therapist, a coach, any type of healing methodology that you might do. I've really been listening to Evan, because the one thing I know about him, and I set this up in the intro, this is definitely his area of expertise, being able to draw out and like find the gold within someone's story. And I think even something that you just shared with us, Evan, that's again something really important I have to continually remind myself of in the work that I do with other humans. It might not happen in 60 minutes. To your point, it took you guys 2 hours of, kind of going through that process to finally get to those pieces that did have gold to them. And I think I can share with you, like one time I was doing a practice coaching session with someone, and I was going through this advanced coaching certification. And part of the advanced coaching certification was you do these practice coaching sessions, and your mentor is in the Zoom call with you, but they're off camera, and you're chatting with them in the chat so that the client can't see. And my client that I was working with, and if he's listening, he'll probably remember this, but the client I was working with, he was telling a story about his father. And in the chat, my mentor popped in and said, "He's stuck in story, get him out of story." And I felt so wrong. I was like, no, like this is not a time to interrupt this human. Like he's sharing something that's really, he feels is really important. Regardless if I think it's important or not, he feels it's important. But I also recognized that I'm here to practice what I signed up for. And so I just paused him for a second. I was like, hey man, I'm just going to pause you for a second. You're kind of in a mode of telling the story, and I'm curious more about what you actually felt. And it completely shut him down. He locked up because the next thing that he said was so important. He's like, no one ever wants to just listen to my story. I was like, fuck. I totally just broke his trust right there. I became yet another person that told him his stories don't matter. And the whole purpose of me being present with another person is not to fix them. It's not to cure anything. It's to be present with them. Like even in my wayfaring method, where I'm training other coaches to do the work that I do, it's one of the things I just continually repeat is we're not here to get them somewhere. If all we do is provide this person a safe place that they can be heard for 60 minutes, we've done our job. And I think to your point, very often what might need to happen, even if we can tell, like, okay, well, this person is just sort of reciting, again, kind of back to this distinction of they're just reciting kind of the facts as they think they existed. Well, what if I just listen? What if I just say, oh, I hear that what you're seeing about that past experience is this, and I'm just handing it back. And they finally have someone that gets to hear them the whole way through. And then next time, and I love the two questions that you said. What makes you
say that?
Yeah, thank you. What makes you say that? Or tell me more about that. Two brilliant questions, just kind of Judith Glaser, that she created conversational intelligence. She calls it double clicking. Because like if you think about a computer, what happens if you double click on something? It opens it up further, right? Like you drop in another level. And I got that same sense from what you were sharing about those questions. Is it's just such a simple way to, let me double click on that. And I love how open and curious those questions are. They don't direct in any way. But it gives that person the opportunity to open up a new level to it. But again, the point I'm trying to make is we might not be able to actually get to that place where someone is ready to go to the deeper level until we actually let them know that they're heard, that they're seen, that they're supported. And so sometimes it might take going through the surface story that some coaching methodologies, some therapeutic methodologies might say is not important. And in fact, we shouldn't listen to or we shouldn't do this. I think that's kind of the danger of some of those shoulds.
That very much reminds me of, I believe it's Carl Jung who said something to the effect of, know all the theories and master the techniques, but when you're face to face with a human soul, be another human soul. And that is something that I will say, it's one of the things that, if I'm being really honest, gunks me up a little bit with sharing, because I feel like there's a lot that I have to share and that I would love to help share these things that I've learned with people, storytellers, filmmakers, whoever. But the paradoxical thing is that, like, yes, there are principles that I can point to. It's very much hostage negotiation or bomb defusal. Like, it's a very intuitive, in the moment kind of feeling them out, feeling the relationship, feeling when can I lean in and ask the question. And I'm really grateful that most of the time with what we're doing, we're in a very embodied space. And so, like, one other thing that I guess I'll share that may be relevant, when we were going into the Granite Games with Chandler, we had a conversation, and I've found this to be a lethal sort of concept to deploy, is that I went to him and I said, look, it's my job to lean in when stuff gets hard. It's my job to ask you hard questions. It's my job to follow you when you don't want anyone to follow you. I'm here to show you in the best possible light I can. That being said, you have the right to tell me to fuck off. And he pulled that card at least twice in the weekend where he said, I need you to not be here anymore. But the knowing that he had the ability to shut it down also meant that there were a bunch of times that I knew part of him didn't want me to be there, but he was like, okay, it's fine. Like, he's not hurting me, And that giving that rope can help. And then also just that, it's an intuitive leaning in thing where sometimes someone will say something and sometimes you just need to let the story play. And sometimes I find that, honestly, it's like you let the story play and then you just don't immediately do anything. You just let it hang for a few seconds. And then a lot of the times the rest of the story will come out after you sit in the silence. And sometimes you'll hear a story and I'll catch someone say something, I'm trying to think of an example now, but someone will say something and to your point, you double click it right there. And I'll jump in. I'll go like, tell me more about that. Because it's something that they're trying to breeze by. It's like, oh, like my mom always said. And you're like, tell me more about that. That's the thing in here. But that's the mythos level where it's like there's the words, there's the facts, there's the logos of it all. And underneath that, you have to feel this kinetic, embodied, intuitive weight of what they're saying and how it connects to everything else. And then go, that's the thing. That's the button that we have to press right now. And you have to know when to press it, because if you press it the wrong time and the wrong way, you can blow someone up. You can shut them down. And you can sit back too hard when they're wanting you to go in. And that's why I say it's like a hostage negotiation. And that's why it's like also being really locked in. This is more of like the film interviewing side. But I may be relevant to your people is like, I see it as a sacred place. And it's a place where my job is to be a grounding force for you, especially if you're in the middle of like lights and camera and crew and it feels a little weird. It's like my job, this is not weird for me. My job is to be not weird with you. And then to be totally grounded and to be not like over careful, but aware of what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. To be aware of looking at my phone and checking for the next question or checking my watch or whatever else, because these are all things that can also close people down. And it's a thing that I've started catching in my whole life now, where it's like, oh, someone's telling a story and part of me is worried about our heart out, but it's not. If I look at my watch right now, how are they going to see that? Oh yeah, wrap it up. Sorry. That's not what I'm trying to say. But actually catching that, and like those are the little things again that it's like, it's often like coming, I think of it also kind of like coming to a dog that's been abused or something. You know, you see these dogs that get rescued off the street and someone wants to take care of them and they're just like, gah, 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 gah. And it's like, no, you're good. We're good. I'm not going to try and take you to the deep end right now. I'm just going to show you that it's safe. I'm going to listen to you. We're going to dance a little. I'm going to show you that I'm listening. And I'm going to, often in my work, it's like I'm going to share little bits of my experience too, so that you can see that I'm not someone who's just going to close up to these things, that we can be real here. And that as you develop that bit of trust, that I find it incredible how deep you can go with people. But it is a skill of like balancing that act of the mission, you know, if it's, we have to make a movie, we have to do therapy, whatever, and just being a person with someone. And I find the more that I'm able to be a person with someone, the technical stuff will all run in the background. You know, I'm listening for beginnings, middles, and ends and how the story connects. But when people feel the ability to be people, the truth comes out. And at the end of the day, the truth is the only thing that heals anyone. If healing is wholeness and wholeness is integrity, then we have to have all of you here.
You named one of, I think, the most difficult parts about doing this type of work. And I'm so fascinated by how similar what you do with creating these documentaries is to the coaching process. The skill set of trusting our intuitive wisdom of those points that you said. When is it time to lean in and maybe even push a little bit? Versus when is it time to sit back and just let there be complete airspace? My gosh, I'm forgetting her name right now, but she wrote a book called Fierce Conversations. And one of the things she talks about in the book is let the silence do the heavy lifting. And that works sometimes. There are also times that I find, because I'm someone that I naturally, like those of you that have been listening to more than one of these podcasts, you'll recognize I'm a person that leaves a lot of space, to the point that I probably bore the fuck out of some of you. And it might not work for others. In fact, I have had people give me that feedback in workshops that I've done or on videos that I've filmed, like, oh, you're boring, you move too slow, you talk too slow, get to the point. So my tendency is to leave a lot of space, is to leave that silence to do the heavy lifting. And what I've had to train myself to do is trust the intuitive moment where this is not the time to leave space. I need to pick up the pace of my voice. I need to lean in. Even if I'm on a Zoom call, I need to lean in a little bit more to my camera and maybe put my foot on the accelerator just a touch to keep us moving. And this is the shit you cannot teach, I don't think. It's something that just has to be opened up over time. And I think a big part of what makes me really fucking good at what I do is I looked back, and so I spent 17 years as a full-time hairdresser at the actual salon chair, like standing at the salon chair. And I did the math. That gave me 27,000 hours of practice of just being present with other human beings. And I'm like, no wonder I'm pretty damn good at what I do. 27,000 hours, I honed that skill set of listening, handing back what I heard, asking questions, knowing where to maybe like, okay, this is a moment that I just got to let that sit, or this is a part that I can maybe lean in and ask a deeper question. And so trusting our intuition, I think, is just as essential of a skill set to develop within these types of processes as any other type of, like, for lack of a better term, kind of hard skill, techniques and processes that we take people through. 100%.
I was just reading last night. was like an Alfred North Whitehead quote, who's like a philosopher and physicist, I think back in like the early 1900s. But I mean, he has so many bangers. But one of them was about this idea that, let me see if I have it real quick, because I texted it to myself and I would hate to misquote it. While I'm doing this, one thing that I had a question for you, because this is something that I've seen a lot in our world, is I had the advantage of, I started doing this when I was 18, so I'm closing in on 15 years now. And I did a lot of things by myself, and then I started to work with other people. And I spent the next, 9 years doing a combination of things, but I was doing a lot of cinematography work freelance, which meant that I got to watch hundreds of people run thousands of interviews. And the thing that was really interesting about that was that actually being the third party in it, you can feel when it's weird. But a lot of the times, not to throw shade, but a lot of people who have only lived in one system or have only played one role, they're actually incredibly unself-aware of what they're doing. And so like I know some people who come in and they have their like people sit down and camera goes on and they're like, okay, so we got multiple cameras, so you don't have to worry about saying anything wrong because we can edit it out, and like, can you put the question back in the answer? And they go into this fucking thing that's just like you can feel the person panic. It's like deer in the headlights right now. And it's like, I don't know what you think that information is providing to them, but it's not helping at all. And it is tough to teach because the minute you teach it, it starts to turn back into a formula again, right? But I've found that the last, couple thousand interviews, stories, whatever else that I've gotten to be a part of, and going from being in the chair to being outside the chair to being in the other side of the chair to really feel the dance has been so helpful for me. And I've stolen so many little things from incredible friends, and learned also the power of trusting your intuition. I was working on a Ferrari documentary a few years ago with my buddy Steve Hoover, and we were interviewing Ralph Lauren in his like crazy car collection in New York, which was like the bat cave of just like, it was $1 billion in cars or something. And he shows up, and it was such a powerful example again of just like, man, the power of the truth. Because Steve sat down and he's like, hey, Ralph, really respect you. Excited to be here. Just so you know, I don't know anything about cars. I'm like a poor kid from outside Pittsburgh, grew up with no money. I still drive a shitty car. But I'm really curious about you and your story and your relationship to this car. So if I don't know anything, like, give me a little grace, basically. Mm-hmm. And Steve didn't have questions. He didn't have a piece of paper. They just had a conversation. And that moment again, there was this interesting thing that happened a little bit later on in the conversation where, again, you feel the just like truth come out of it, where Ralph was talking about authenticity basically, and how he was like, I've never bought a car to make money on it. I've only ever sold one car in my life. Like, I bought these things because I love them. And he was like, when you're a person who allows yourself to love what you love, good things happen, basically. But he was like, you guys, you're cool guys. Like, you showed up and you're not wearing polo. You're not playing to me right now. You were just you. And I can tell that. And I pick up on that. And that was another little thing again, where it's like, oh yeah, I've felt all the times that people are like, Nike, a lot of time Nike has a policy that everyone on the crew has to wear Nikes to set, which I think is insane. But it's like these other little things where it's like, where am I adapting to who I think you want me to be, as opposed to being who I am? And like some people would say, oh, Steve not knowing about cars is a liability. But when you actually just hit them with that right off the bunt and you're like, I'm going to do a human conversation about human things right now, and I want to understand your world, help me understand. Another really underrated question, help me understand. That like you get below again all the bullshit of I'm another billionaire who gets asked by people all the time who just want to come blow smoke up my butt and like don't actually want to hear how I am. And it's like, how can we diffuse that and just be people again? Just one soul to another soul. We don't have techniques. We don't have our perfect approved list of questions. We're just going to talk.
There's two things in there that I do think are really essential. The first is that aspect of authenticity, which this is the thing that ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, I believe will never actually replace. It'll try really hard. And people that I've spoken to that have used AI as kind of their coach or therapist. How do I say this? Because I don't want to say that they are wrong. And I don't necessarily want to say that they did anything wrong by, sitting with ChatGPT or Claude. But I have heard some people that have used that in as a coaching or almost a therapy resource. And they were pulled into this sense of almost humanness that they felt with this computer generated conversation. And my point is that can be acted out in such a convincing way if I know how to speak to you. And I think that this is where we can see AI, especially if we've talked to it for a long time. It'll build up the ability to say to you what it thinks you, or what it knows you need to hear for it to convince you that it's smart, that it's on your side, that it's got you, and that it's part of this kind of human interaction. But that's not real authenticity. Real authenticity, I think, is exactly what you just shared with us, which is, hey, look, Ralph, I don't know shit about cars, and I'm really excited to find out more about you. Like, that's fucking real authenticity. It's not. Whereas
ChatGPT would be like, you're a yada, yada, yada. And, it's like it immediately goes to just like blowing smoke up you. And it wants you to feel good. And I had a Substack post about this a while ago. It's like there's so many studies that's what it does. Like they're tracking that it's just very good at giving people what they want to hear.
Yes.
Which the deeper conversation for me there is, I think it's also a reflection of a culture that's largely leaning into telling people what they want to hear. But I do want to flag just something real quick, which is that I did the thing. I started asking a question and then I went into a story and I never finished asking the question, which actually, to make this a live object lesson, I don't think the story is a problem. This is one of the fun things we get to see with editing. It's that what I probably should have done was tell the Ralph story and then funnel into the question of, do you guys get to watch other people do things differently than you do? Because that was really kind of the underlying question and point of that story.
Yes, it's something that I really highly encourage people to do, is observe other people supporting other people, and to watch other people in a therapy session, in a coaching session, in a guiding session, because there is something that we can only learn from that person perspective. Because when we're in it, when we're in the process, there's so many things happening for us, right? Like there's so many of our own protections and so many things that we're monitoring for ourselves. And I love what you said, like sometimes being the third person, you can observe, ooh, there's something funky happening here. But if I was actually in, like in your case, the interviewer seat, or if I'm in the coach seat, I might be so kind of stuck in something for myself. Maybe it is a concern that I'm feeling some certain way, but I can't figure out how to call it out or how to adjust to it. That third person seat often can be the seat that goes, oh, I can actually see what's happening here. And that learning might not have happened in the actual driver's seat. And like in the wayfaring method, this is something we actually do a lot. We do, like within our workshop, we'll do round robin coaching sessions. So I'll be the coaching client, and all of the attendees, you get to ask me one question each. And it's basically like you're coaching me, but we do it where it's like, if it was you and a couple other people, you would ask the first question. Unfortunately, you don't get to ask the follow-up question. The second person gets to ask the follow-up question. And it's really fun because, number one, people get to observe what happens for other people. And number two, you can't predict where you want people to go.
You have to let go of the control of it all.
Yeah. But I think such a powerful piece of that process is for other people to get to sit back and go, ooh, I would have never asked that question. oh, me observing things from the outside, I can actually pick up that moment that something shifted, something happened there.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of a exercise that I did in Kevin Walton's program last year, which I found to be super powerful, which was basically just people get paired off and you would set a 5-minute timer. And one person was the question asker and one person was the answerer. And the rule was there's no dead space. And he was like, if you have a follow-up question, you ask a follow-up question. If you don't have a follow-up question, you ask a new question. But you just both have to play ping pong for 5 minutes. And people, you can feel the panic again. And then you get into it and you're like, oh, we're fine. Like, we're dancing, right? And it's, where are you from? What do you love about where you're from? How do you get there? Yada, yada. And then it's like, what do you do for fun? Like, and you just see the conversation morph, but you feel that like need to control it fall apart a little bit, and you learn to trust yourself in that space. So I love that, because I do think that's a big part of it is, like when you're trying to get somewhere, I often share this as like, there's the story that you want to tell and there's the story that's real. And when you get lucky, those things are close, but they're almost never the same. And if you get too far into like, well, the story is X, and then you go ask whatever, let's say it's, what was your experience? How did this drug change your life? And they're like, well, it didn't really, or like, it's been really rough. And then you're like, ugh, I don't know what to do now. My whole castle of cards is falling apart. But there is something you can stick with there. And then the other thing that I just wanted to call out was back to your earlier conversation about the mentor who was like there in story, right? One of the tricky things about all of this is that we are talking about embodied experiences between embodied beings. Language is limited. Language lacks a lot of nuance. And if you were to try and just give someone a book on like how to be nasty at tennis, they're going to miss a lot. Like there's a lot of inferring. But when you can actually watch someone who's great and can have that interaction, you start to pick up on these little things. And a lot of the times there is this nuance that you can start to pick up on of, seeing someone go, I don't know anything about cars, or seeing someone let the story run and how they relate to it, and then seeing when they pinch it off. And that when we get into these just like verbal, linguistic, written representations of it, it's like, well, this is what you do. And then in your mind, that's what you do. But there's really not a lot of nuance there. And now you're just falling back to this like very brute, just low resolution thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I'm working on launching a community and doing some more mentoring myself this year. And one of the things that I have really found to be the most profound is that I will aim to like record our client calls, record interviews, whatever it is, and just show them that. And it's like, just watch me. I can try and boil this down into 60 seconds, which is a whole other tangent we don't have to get into, but like it's so hard to teach you this in 60 seconds. But if you sit there and watch someone who's really good at what they do what they do, you pick up on their body language, you pick up on their tone, you pick up on the signals of what's actually going on here. And that is all deeper than, well, if they start telling a story, stop. Or if they start telling a story, just let them go. And that inverting the pyramid of, instead of always having the mentor kind of watching you and giving you notes, it's like, I think we could use a lot more letting the students watch the mentors in real time. Because I've found even in like, there's another example of this with client calls recently. I was on a client call and it was sort of a sales creative discovery call, which I'm really grateful to have had people who I've watched who are really good at this. But it was our first time working with this agency in this capacity. And we got off the call and I immediately, my phone rings and she goes, "You're really good at that. Like, what did you just do?" And it was this light bulb moment of like, oh, you asked questions that we wouldn't have. You didn't follow our framework. Like, you just kind of blew our system up, but we saw you actually dance the dance to where the client now feels seen and heard and understood, and they feel like they can trust us to make a next step. And it's like, yeah, because that's what we're actually getting at here. But the actual thing we're getting at here, whether it's healing in a therapy context, coaching, whatever, is like, there's some deeper thing that has to get met and shifted here than just the sort of surface level box checking of it all. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing that I will say is like my general hesitation towards AI is that it's literally a language model, and language is an incredibly shitty, low resolution version of reality. And so it can do great at things that language is good at. It can do great at math, mm-hmm. but most of what we actually do exists below the language level, back on the mythos and eros level of sensations and meaning and all of that. And I think we're going to have this reckoning where we realize just how limited language is.
Yes. It's awesome. This is so perfect because my friend Zulu, who is actually a fine art painter and tattoo artist, he's going to be my guest on the podcast within the next few weeks. And a big part of what we're going to talk about is symbology, symbolism, and the power behind symbols. And it goes to exactly that. There's so much that if we try to place a word to it, if we try to put a sentence down, it can be almost impossible to share things with words and sentences. Like in Daoism, that's something that like one of the first kind of introductions to Daoism that I was part of. They were basically like, as soon as we start saying these things out loud, we're pretty much off base already. Because everything that we're trying to describe through what we're explaining to you is beyond language.
Right. 100%.
It's like, fuck, man. Well, how do we do it then?
Well, and that's where we're dancing with the space between a lot of the times, is how I would say it. There's a wonderful book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, and I am a huge fan of all Ian's work, but it really centers on brain hemispheres and basically how our Western culture has become so left hemisphere dominated that it's probably going to destroy us if we don't fix it. Which my quick tangent there is, if LLMs are not a golden calf to the idol that is our left hemisphere, I don't know what is. That's all that is. It's not emotional. It's not intuitive. It has no imagination. It's just a word churner, which is exactly what our left hemisphere does. And it gets lost in its maps and all these stories. Yeah. But he has so much depth to all of his work, but there's one point where he's talking about the power in a symbol is in its ability to communicate an array of implicit meanings. And that the minute that it gets distilled to one meaning, it loses its power in the same way that when you explain a joke, it's not funny anymore. And that's like, it's a very paradoxically tough thing to sit with again. But I think it's part of what we're talking about here is that we're listening to stories. You're listening to the space. You're listening to like the body language. You're listening to what's not being said as much as you're listening to what is being said. Yeah. And then you're able to interject in a way that allows you to go a level deeper with that person. But when we get too caught up in the explicit and we get too caught up in our frameworks and we get too caught up in even the words they're saying, which may be relevant or not, we lose sight of the fact that there is a deeper mesh of being here that we're actually getting to interact with. And that a lot of the times those implicit spaces are the ones where everything is connected out, and then you put a finger on that and it actually allows the whole thing to continue to unfold a little bit more.
I like how you said that. You put a finger on it and things get to unfold. And this is something that I really learned as I've been learning Hakomi method therapy. Is they do a lot of just making statements, which I was very much taught is not what we're supposed to do within coaching. We're supposed to specifically ask more questions and then, basically reflect back what we heard. But the purpose of doing these statements and tests and experiments is, hey, if I put my finger here, what happens? What unfolds? What opens up next? Yeah. And so it's all experimental. It's all just with this sense of like curiosity. And what if I touched you on the shoulder? What happens?
Right. Well, and that reminds me of, we've both attended Sacred Sons events, and some of that sort of constellation work where you're seeing all the weird little associations we have, where it's like, what sticks out to you about this guy? And how do you feel about that? And it's like, I don't want to say none of it's real. None of it's explicitly real. It's all implicitly and subjectively real. And so we're getting below the explicit of it all and getting back to what does that mean to you? But yeah, there's a lot of fun you can have. Again, I feel like I'm I'm going to get myself in trouble with therapists because I'm not a therapist. But that's another like very big skill is sometimes you throw a shoulder check at someone, like a friendly shoulder check. Like someone will go on a story And I'll just hit them with like, so you hate your job? And they're like, oh, no. And then they go into, they pivot the other side of it. And you're just kind of finding their little parts running around, and just kind of smacking them once in a while and being like, I see that. You're trying to shit on this, but not shit on it. What are you doing? Where are you going? And you do the little dance, and then you finally get again to the real thing. But it is a very intuitive, like, yes, sometimes we're taught always ask questions. Sometimes we do this, but it's like sometimes someone just needs someone to actually tap them. They need to get a little love tap check there and be like, what are you saying here, really? I was having a conversation with a friend via voice memos a few weeks ago, and it was similar. She had told me a big story. And I was like, honestly, what I just heard is 8 minutes of you going back and forth between telling me how you absolutely love your job and wish you could get promoted so that you could fire everyone there. And I'm very confused at why that is. And she just sent me back a fuck. And I was like, I'm just going to let you sit with whatever that is again. Yeah. Like, I don't have anything else to do there, but that's the game, right? And it's something that I will say, it's something that I feel like a lot of what I was also raised with is like, don't do this. And some people aren't open to it at the end of the day. And like, you have to learn to read the room. But I so love the people who show up that way in my life. Like when I'm getting caught up and someone can give me the little check and they're like, hey, you're doing that thing again. And it's like, oh yeah, I am. And then I'm back in my body and I'm back here and I'm back able to engage. And sometimes I feel like we just sit back on our frameworks too much and we sit back on the normalcy of it all and actually just throwing the pattern interrupt. And whether the pattern interrupt is listening and being curious for the first time, or whether it's actually checking someone who's used to always just having their story swallowed. It's like, is that really true? And then you watch them just panic a little bit again and go like, oh no, I hadn't predicted this. And you're getting them out of the gestalt pattern of it all. The quote that I found was looking for earlier is, it is a profoundly erroneous truism that we should cultivate the habit of thinking of what we are doing. The precise opposite is the case. Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. Alfred North Whitehead.
Mm-hmm. So what does that say to you?
To me, it comes back to the embracing the dance of it. It comes back to, yes, like we can learn principles and theories and systems, and that stuff is valuable. It does feed into us learning it somehow. But for me to play the song, I can't be thinking about the song. And like Ian McGilchrist talks about this actually on the level of knowing, where he's like is the person who knows the dance, the person who can tell you how the neurons are firing to the blood and what order of energy is going where, or is the person who knows the dance the person who can do the dance? Because the ballet dancer may know nothing of the underlying physiology of all of it. They probably couldn't tell you the physics of how, a center of gravity and a support base works or whatever else, but they can do the dance. And at some point, if those things are helping you achieve what you're aiming to achieve, great. And like I've always said this in filmmaking, where it's like there's technical things. It's like light meters and yada yada. And I'm like, if you need that, if it's in the way, learn it. If it's not, fuck it.
I love it.
You don't have to know all the music theory. You don't have to know everything. And I guess that's where I'm not going to claim to have any authority to your audience, but like finding that space to trust yourself in the moment a little bit, and trust that you have studied, and trust that you have homework, and trust that you have experience, and that you've been taught so many things and you've been in so many situations, and that we can pop back up into our heads and want to know what's the right thing. And when we can actually just let go of all that again for a second, because all of that you can remember in your head is in your body. Let your body know what your body knows how to do.
It's beautifully shared, and I would 100% support everything that you just shared. And I do think that that's why having some foundations is super important. Just some like really rock solid foundations underneath our feet, because in those moments because it's going to happen. Like I still to this day, I'll be in the middle of a coaching session and my client will throw something at me, and it kind of sits me back on my heels, and I'm like, I'm not really sure what to do with this. I'm not sure where to go. My intuition is not saying lean in. My intuition isn't saying lean back. So what do I have under my feet that I've built really strong that keeps me here? And sometimes it's even just coming back to a basic structure of the coaching flow, you know. It's like, oh, that's right, I know what to do here. I'm still in this part of the coaching flow. So just ask a simple question. Just get us back moving, you know. And so I love what you said, because big picture, I do think we really have to learn to trust in that intuitive, deeper sense of wisdom. And when that is held with solid foundations too, to me, it allows me to flow even more with the intuitive part, because I know that there's something underneath my feet that will catch me if that fails.
Right. It's like sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, it might not be the perfect thing, like you said. Like, it might not be the quote right thing in that moment, but just there was actually, this reminds me of a quote, or not necessarily a quote, but it's something that I heard Colin Powell. It was this interview that he was doing, and they basically were like, "Do you think you ever made the wrong choice? In all this time of, like, you know, directing the nation's, you know, military, did you ever make the wrong choice?" And he was like, "No, because every choice moved us in a direction, and as long as we were moving, I could adjust it. The only bad choice would have basically been to make no choice at all." I was like, as long as we're moving, we can keep changing, we can keep adjusting. I thought that was really powerful.
100%. When I was just going to say, very much to echo that, again, it's a nuanced, complex thing. It's not just like throw yourself into a room and just make it up as you go. Like, you have to have principles. You have to have an understanding of the game you're playing, is almost how I would put it, which is another really powerful kind of mythological thing. Is like, is my job right now to get the most controversial story? Is my job to get, you know, the thing that sells the best? Is my job to tell the truth? Is my job, like, what is my understanding of the game that I'm playing right now changes how I show up in the game. But then also having those underlying principles, and that's part of what I'm really excited to get into teaching. And I will say again in this, like, I'm excited to work with you to see my own barriers that I erect to myself in sharing that stuff. But it reminds me of, like, when you see those lessons where they're teaching babies how to swim. And it's like, you get the impulse where the baby falls in water and it, like, turns onto its back and floats and gets its mouth out of the water. And it's like, you got to have a ripcord like that. Because, yeah, you're going to have someone hit you with something that's going to be, you're going to be dazed and confused. There's no avoiding that. There's no preparing for that. So what do you do when you get blacked out? How do you get back here? And those are skills that can really help. And then taking your experiences and sharing them with other people and processing it, we learn and we get better and we develop. But you have to be in the arena at some point. You can study jousting all day long. You can have ChatGPT tell you a million things about your business plan. But until it's been deployed in reality, it's going to miss a whole lot of that finer resolution detail. And until you're sitting down and actually having a conversation with a person, until you're sitting in the room where you're like, this day costs $100,000, and if I fumble this thing, we don't have a story, and you've learned how to handle the pressure of that and release the tension, it's all just theory. And at the end of the day, we're in the business of practice.
I just love our conversations, Evan. I just absolutely love them. I knew that we were going to just go off on this journey together today, because we do this. This is how it happens every time we've talked. And I really love the way that you process things. It's very thoughtful, but even more so, I feel like it's very introspective. Like, I feel like each thing that comes up, it's like you kind of reflect it on the entire inside of you. It's like, I'm going to reflect it in every corner, bounce it off every little quote I've read, bounce it off this book that I read, bounce it off my experiences. And so, you know, everything that you've shared with us, I know it comes from a really loving heart that wants to be in service. I also know that it comes from a mind that's well studied and well cared for.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. I just really appreciate you having and facilitating the conversation, and honestly bringing up the question, which is one that I've wrestled with and not gotten to have this conversation with someone, which is like, what do we do with all these books that say no stories? It's a beautiful question.
Yeah.
And it's another evidence of the fact that there's something inside you that knows.
Yeah. And I hope that those of you that are listening, this will kind of sound fucked up, but I almost hope that you have more questions than you have answers at the end of this. Because I don't know that I have more answers. I have more information. I have more viewpoints to reflect in different directions off of these questions that I have. But I love this space of like, I feel like I'm just even deeper in curiosity.
It's a beautiful place to be. I will say, I will just acknowledge that like, I feel like I can be very high level with all of this sometimes. And if there were anything that you were wanting to pull down to a more grounded place, a more like practical place, I'm open to that. Or we can just leave them to chew on it.
I think leaving to chew is exactly the right place for now, because I feel like there's potentially a part 2 to this. One of the things that I'd love to do in the future too with you is almost like a mini workshop on the podcast of like, walk us through the Evan way of pulling out the story and developing, and I don't know if you can do that or not, but that might be a fun future episode.
Sounds like a challenge worth facing.
Yes. Well, my friend, thank you so very much. Like I said, every time we get together, I feel like I'm a smarter human after our conversations. So I just so appreciate you.
Dude, I so appreciate you. Thank you for having me. And I really hope that this resonates with people, because you put a lot of care into how you showed up here today. And I just want to honor that too. I feel like there's a lot of love that goes to the guests and not enough love that goes to the hosts for all the setting this up and scheduling it and making sure it's working. So I just want to call that out, man, that I know this is a lift, and it's a lift that you don't have to do and that you choose to do because you care. And I honor that.
Fully received. Thank you.